Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Peah, Perek Zayin, Halacha Gimel, and Daled. We're learning Daf Samach Beis, and we left off on Daf Samach Aleph, Amid Beis, in the beginning of the third line before the bottom of the Amid. We're going to begin learning a series of stories of Agadata that will demonstrate the extraordinary quality of the fruits of Eretz Yisrael. Indeed, as we say in Al Hamichya, right? Lechoil mipiria viluzboya mituva. There's a special toiva that's imbued in Peiros Eretz Yisrael. And sadly, that after the Churban Habayis and after the times of Rabbi, of Rabbeinu HaKadosh, as we'll see specific stories, there was a tremendous diminution in that extraordinary bracha, almost to the point that Al-Pi Gashmias, Al-Pi Derech HaTeva, it could look today like any other land. Now, really, the link between Gashmias and Ruchnias is everywhere. However, one of the meanings of Eretz HaKadoisha, Kedusha, means that the land itself is more batal, and therefore there's a greater manifestation of godliness, and that has to be expressed through the Gashmias. And indeed, that's why throughout history, during Bizman Habayis, as we'll see in the earlier times, there was greater blessings. Subsequently, there was a diminution of it. And in our days, we're going to see all of that coming right back. Now, from the many stories, we're going to see a shift downwards in the times of Rabbeinu HaKadosh. We will also learn Me'inyan Le'inyan, also in Agadata, that Rab Hanania, not wanting to receive benefit from monies that he received under a false pretense, even though halachically the money was his, he did not want to keep those monies. He did not give it back to the person who gave it to him. That was not necessary. That was not the right thing to do. What he did do with that money is that he donated it towards the building of a Beis HaMedrash, which is also a very interesting topic, as we'll speak more when we learn these stories inside. All of that will be the conclusion of Halacha Gimel. On Daf Samach Beis, Amid Beis, we're going to begin with a new Mishnah with Halacha Daled. The Mishnah is going to continue to speak about matnois aniyim. And we had a similar topic above. Topic here will be that since we already said that on the vines, if you have underdeveloped clusters, oilolis, they belong to the aniyim. We also learned above that when people plant, in this case, vines too close one to the other, in order for them to grow better, you have to meidel them. Hamedel means you thin them out, you cut out various branches, allowing for the remaining ones more space to grow bigger. Question is whether a person is allowed to do that in his vineyard. Why not? Because since on the current branches, there might be something that will belong to the aniyim, so by me thinning out those branches, I might be taking away something that does not belong to me. And that is a general topic, is what type of infringement, what type of rights must the owner give back or give up because of, in this case, the oilulis. And we're going to have in our Mishnah, Machlekes Tanoim, Rabbi Yehuda says that the owner is allowed to thin it out. Rav Meir says that the owner is not allowed to thin it out, and we'll see how far we'll get. The Gemara opens up this topic by giving a phenomenal halachic insight, explaining the Machlekes Rabbi Yehuda and Rav Meir. Okay, without any further ado, this is really, we have a lot more of this in the Babli. It's not so common in the Yerushalmi, but basically the entire daf today will be a Magadata. On top of that, something that we spoke out a few times in Masechta Brachos, that many of these stories we have in Babli. In our case, we'll have them in Masechtas Ksubos. If you remember, the end of Masechtas Ksubos is all about the unbelievable, even physical phenomena that we find in Eretz Yisrael. And it will be very interesting to make a real overlap and to see where in details does the Babli differ from the Yerushalmi to get a greater appreciation between the difference between these two Gavaldic works of Torah Shabbat. The Gemara opens up with the words Dolma. I know that when we learned Brachas, we spoke out various interpretations. We're going to go with Dolma. Look inside the Rash Ilio, all the way at the bottom on the left side. Dolma is a composite of two words, Da Lema, this should be said. Remember al derech demai, the next Masechta. Demai is demai. Like, what is this? Is it tied? Is it not tied? Dolma is this should be said. This Maisa has to be said. Now what? Rabbi Yossi ben Chanina, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. These are three Amoraim. This is in the earlier era of the Amoraim. Ovru al Kram Doron. They went by the vineyard of Doron. The Rashid Elio says, Kram Doron, the last Rashid Elio in the Amid, Samachalaf Amid base, Shem Ish Shemoy Doron. In other words, it belonged to a certain individual. Others say that the name of the vineyard was Doiron. And actually, the word Doiron means a gift. It was a gifted vineyard. And what happened? There was a sharecropper which has rights to some of the produce. So he had the right to take and to give. And he removed from this kerem a parsika. He removed a peach. Now, we're speaking about a vineyard. From here, you see that peaches were cultivated in vineyards. There was no issue of kalayim. We already spoke out that many times, but it's interesting how dafkin a kerem, you had a peach. And this peach was so humongous physically that Achlun Inun, Rababo, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, you have three Amoraim. All of them were satisfied, were eating from the same peach. And according to the Marafulda, it's not going to the donkeys. Other people say that, but the donkey drivers, right, that came along to help them with their stuff, all of them were able to eat to their fill from one peach, turning to Daf Samach Beis. And not only that, but Viatroin, that's how humongous it was. Now, the Gemara over here says, Visharuna, Kehodein Lefisa, the Kfar Chananya. They estimated that this peach was as large as a typical frying pan that was used in Kfar Chananya. And how big is that? Machzik Sa'ah Shaladoshin. It can hold a saw of lentils. One just to point out, in Ksubas, Afkufyu days, where you have the story, there it says it can hold 5 saw. Here it says it can hold 1 saw. Not that as time went on, the story grew. God forbid. I think that's a God forbid thought. That's a human thought, but that's not the way Chazal work. There's a significance in these shiurim. Anyways, 1 saw is a few gallons. Imagine, guys, you have a peach that has the content of a few gallons. Now, Basar Yoimin, at some time, can mean a year later, whatever, a while later, Avron Taman, they passed in the same place. And Apik Loin, today, Tlas Legoy Yodei, the others brought out to them 2 or 3 peaches. All of these 2 or 3 fit inside his hand. In other words, at this time, which was only a relatively short amount later, the peaches went back to being human, normal, earthly peaches. And Amrulay, and they told him, no, boy, we would like for you to give us the peach from that tree that you gave us last time. They assumed they were given peaches from another tree. Amaloin, to which this others told them, it's from the same tree. In other words, they witnessed the mayhem, how the Holy Land went from being, even physically, this type of, the bracha was huge, and it went to being back normal. And the Kari Aloi, and they read the pasuk in Tehillim, that Eretz Pri means a land that is blessed with some sort of real abundance of peiros. What happens? Limalecha. It becomes a wasteland. It becomes salty. Why does that happen? Because of the bad choices of those who live in it. That's the correlation. And the link between what we do and what happens in the world in Eretz Yisrael is a lot more direct and more obvious, which is part of the meaning of a holy land versus in the rest of the world. We're always, what we do will have an effect on Gashmias, but it's more twisted. It doesn't reflect in a direct way. Amar Rabbi Chanina. Kat Salikos Lohachem. Rabbi Chanina lived in Bavel. So he says, when I came over here, meaning this was written in Eretz Yisrael, when I come to Eretz Yisrael, They say this, I took off my belt and I tied it to the belt of my son and I tied it to the belt of my donkey driver. In other words, he tied three belts together and makpa kirasa and he was attempting to encircle the tree trunk of a carob tree of Eretz Yisrael. Anyone, and those trees were so thick, so large, the time, all of these three belts were unable to fully circle around it. Another phenomena that you find by the carob tree, that katzis, chat charuv, I cut off only one carob, unegad mala yudoy devash, and I had a handful of honey that flowed out, that was speaking about the juices from the charuv, by simply cutting it off. And indeed, Bashgacha Pratas, we are in the days already of Iyar, going into Lag BaOmer, that one of the miracles that happened was that there was a carob tree that was placed by the Eibishter in front of the cave of the Rashbi that produced charuvim. But what type of charuvim? The charuv that we know is dry. I'm sure it's very nutritious. But when the Ayid, Tzadikim, they live 12, 13 years off the charuv, it's a whole different type of charuv. Let's go back. Amar Rabbi Yechanan. Says Rabbi Yechanan that Yafa Sifsuf. Sifsuf means the unsere Zeburis, the Marafulda says. The Sifsuf means the most inferior fruits. That was better than the greatest, again, something special about the peaches that we ate when we were older. In other words, it wasn't their days that they should witness this huge diminution of Peiris Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Yechanan says, in my days, the world changed. As the Rebbe keeps on saying, that in our days, the world is going to change back to the way it should be, and even better. In other words, this is the final, that was the generation that went from the Geula into Galus, even though the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed many years prior, 200 years prior, but there was still a remnant of the Kedusha, and it was in Rabbi Yechanan's days that it completely went away. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Bar Ba, that Sa'ah Arbelis, that in earlier times, a Sa'ah of wheat of Arbelis, the Marafulda says Arbelis is a neighborhood near Tiberia. How great was the produce that came from there? That you have Sa'ah of wheat, which is a quantity. And what happens is that you remove the kernels and you grind it into a flour. Now, before we go read inside the Gemara, as we all more or less know already from learning, especially people that also have practical experience, that when you sift flour, that which is more coarse remains above the sieve, and the more refined goes underneath it. And what they used to do then is that the first most refined, which is called soilus, greatest quality, that is a grade A. Then they would take that which is above the sieve, which we call kemach, and they would sift it again. It's every time you sift it, whether the holes were larger, whether simply you put more pressure. So you had from every process, the one milamato was superior, and that which remains above is inferior, and you keep on using each one. Now, obviously, guys, if you're starting with only one saw of wheat, what's the max you're going to have? Well, you're going to have even much less than a saw, because it's a saw of wheat. You're removing the shaft, you're removing the klipa. Nevertheless, what the Gemara is saying is that when you would take the flour and make it into a dough, that inflates it. So from one saw of the wheat that grew in that place called Arbel, you would have a whole saw of soilus. And then you would have another saw of kemach, and another saw of kibbut, another saw of subin, another saw of mursin, and the worst, usaw gininin. Each time when you added it with water, each one summed to the shear of a saw, because of the added water. It's not the shtitnish. But nowadays, again, this is similar to what Rabbi Yechanan says. This is Rabbi Bar Abba, that if we take one saw of wheat, all together, all of the dough will not amount to one saw. Everything was diminished. Says the Gemara Vayt, there's something huge in here. There's no doubt about it, because we're not talking about the size of the peach. We're speaking about the same saw, but how the same saw, what would come out of it, I think it has to do with how much of the stalk is klipa, how much of the stalk is kernels. Where did we learn together that the kernels, we learned this in Bavli for sure, that before the chait, trying to remember where, that before the chait, as in the future, that was a Hamoitzi Lechem in Aretz Sugya. Maybe that wasn't the Yerushalmi. It wasn't the Yerushalmi brachas. That whether it's we're speaking about how it used to be or what will be. And when it comes to Hamoitzi Lechem in Aretz, Alpin Nigla, the Gemara in Yerushalmi asks Hamoitzi Lechem in Aretz, Hamoitzi Chitim in Aretz, not Lechem in Aretz. So Asid. So that we that day I have to think the exact lashon that in the future the earth itself will give out a gluskois or some other beautiful expression. In other words, what will grow off the stalk will already be something that is bred, a Danish. I think Pasha, the kernels, the grains were 100 times the size. That's why they ended up with all this amount.
If they're 100%,
not 100.
It's still strange how one saw can become 6.
Because Danny, let's say right now from the one saw of wheat, let's say 5% is kernels. If then 30% were kernels, 30% of it was the kernel. Works, begashmis. And maybe that's the hemshech. It was also physically bigger. Sure, there was also more nutritious and healthier, etc. Size. Everything here is about the size, the charuva size. Says the Gemara Rab Chuna, b'shem Rabbi Oven, that cinnamon, cinnamon is a very healthy food. That Michael Izamaya, in earlier times, even goats, there was such an abundance of it that even the goats ate cinnamon. And not only that, Eden would actually, they would cultivate cinnamon for that purpose. As the Panei Moshe says, that there was so much cinnamon that even on Michaelis. Okay. In today's lesson, they gave caviar to the pets. In other words, there was a madana mitzvim kov. Rabchuna b'shem Rabbi. Shnei tamidim shoyim akrivim b'chol yoyim. That the 2 carbon tomits that they brought every day, they were also, this is literally huge. We're speaking about size. The height of these lambs were so tall that when you would put them over the back of a camel, their feet, the front feet, the hind feet, they would actually be resting on the ground. That's how tall, that's how humongous these Shepsalach were. Guys, we had this mamish in the Ksubis, and that whole sugya of Eretz Zovas Cholav U'Devash. The Cholav is Cholav Izim, and the Devash, right, is the Devash of figs. And what happened was that he once tied his goat to a ta'ena, and when he came back, both the goat and the figs were so saturated with milk and with honey that they oozed out on their own. And u'matzah Devash v'cholav, they were me'oiravim, which is the pashat, the pshat of Eretz Zavas Cholav U'Devash. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Amar l'Rab, either Peridi, or we have Rav Preda, or we have Rav Pedas. We're going to go with the words that we have it inside. Rabbi told Rav Peridi, Leis at chameli hahi segula the goy karmach. Will you not show me the word segula? Right? Segula, here, segula means a eshkoil. The taich of segula in Yerushalmi could mean a cluster of grapes. Why don't you show me the renowned eshkoil that you have in your vineyard? Rebbe's asking. Amalei, so Rafididi says, yeah, okay, sure, I'll show it to you. So Nafik, boye, mechamoyalei, he went with the desire by Tachama, to show it, when they were still far away from it. Rebbe looked up. Rebbe was going towards that direction. And what appeared to him, what was really that segula, that cluster, it was something so huge that from the distance, it looks like there was an ox. And actually, Amalei, so Rebbe tells to Rabridi, Rabreda, Rapedas, are you not worried that you have an ox roaming around in your vineyard? No, Rabridi says, that's it. Amalei Chodein Toira the Atzavan. That which you think is the ox, who Segula, that is the famous clusters that you wanted to see. So Kari Aloi or Ilave, so Rabbi recited the pasuk in Shira Shirim, Ach Hamelach b'Mesibai, that when the king was still in his banquet, Nirdi Nasan Reichai, my perfume gave forth its fragrance. The pshat of the pasuk is a words of criticism that when Yidden were still Har Sinai, they were already betraying God with the ego. It was when you're still by my banquet, you're sharing your perfume with someone else. That is the pshat. What the Rebbe was saying over here is that only when the king is b'mesibai, only when there's a Beis Hamikdash, is it befitting for the land to give of its fragrance, for the land to have such a bracha, big ashmis. But now, says the Rebbe, Beis Mukdasha Charif, he's speaking to the land. The temple is no longer standing. At koyim b'kashus yach, and you're still stubborn. Stubborn means you're holding on to the way things used to be in a good way. Stop with that already. The temple was destroyed. And because of that statement, miyad isbu'un v'lei ashkach, Rebbe demanded, right? That demand, in other words, for the land to stop giving forth as a bracha, went into effect, and no longer can such brachas be found anymore. So obviously you see that this going down was a couple of steps. You have this story of Rabbi, which was at the end of the times of the Tanoim, and it got even worse. Like Rabbi Yochanan says, B'yamai, or the story of Reish Lakish with the peach. So it went down and it went down and it went down a couple of times. Yeah. Likewise, when it's going back up, compared to how the Holy Land was 100 years ago, can't compare how blessed it is right now, and how it is right now won't be comparable to how it will be when the Beis Hamikdash will be rebuilt. Says the Gemara Vayit. Aison, Kumei, today, Pulgin, they brought two radishes. They brought these two radishes that they picked between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And in what year? That's the key. It was the year right after Shemitah. And the gamlon, these radishes were so large that you needed the camel herst to carry two radishes. When Rabbi saw them, his presumption was, especially if it happened after his story with Rava, Peridi, there's no longer such brachas in Eretz Yisrael. So if you bring vegetables that were plucked right after Rosh Hashanah, l'chu'ura, when were they sowed? Now, not in a ba'oifan ha'asr, but they were svichim shvius. Svichei shvius, there are many prohibitions with it. So he says, is this not svichei shvius? That's what he presumed. Lav, asr, are they not forbidden? Why is that? He's explaining, because are they not svichim? Taka only asr midrabanan. He wasn't suspecting that someone planted them on the Shemitah year, but are they not under the status of svichei shvius? So Amalei, so they responded, no. Ba'puke reishata is darun. We planted it after Rosh Hashanah. In other words, aside of the size of Peiros Eretz Yisrael, you have the speed, the alacrity. You plant, and it right away grows out. And by the way, before the Chet, that's literally how it was. You put a seed on the ground, and everything grew right away. You have all these chazals. Woman got pregnant, right? Chava got pregnant, and she gave birth right away. Things didn't take time. So there was size, which is makim, and then you have zman, which connected one to the other. Now, at that time, prior to that, right, there were restrictions in not allowing to get vegetables right after the Shemitah year. Actually, what we also learned, Danny, was we had this also in the Yerushalmi already, that there was prior to importing, it was after they began to import. That's another reason. It's not a stira. The Gemara over here says that one of the reasons why Rabbeinu HaKadosh took off this restriction, which used to disallow someone from buying produce in Eretz Yisrael right after Shemitah, because maybe it's Svichei Shvi'is, Rabbeinu HaKadosh saw, even though that type of bracha was diminished, this manoi, but alacrity, speed, things happen very quick. People can make money very quick in Israel. I'm sure they can lose money very quick as well, but we're speaking about the brachas that are there. Everything happens quick. Daf samach beis amid beis. So we have over here, Iro, that missed part of the Gemara, which is very important over here for you, especially. And okay, they asked Rabbi, what's the meaning of the pasuk? A pasuk in Yoel that offshu perudois tachas megrit foiseyem, that seeds have rotten right beneath their shovels. What does that refer to? So tachas doesn't mean literally underneath. When there's a curse, when there's a famine, when the earth is not producing well, you put seeds in, you turn over the shovel, and the seeds are rotten. Amaloim tachas shehoyinu garfim devash. That there used to be such abundance. Again, this is all in the times of Rabbi. He made one step down. He brought it forth. He connected Gashmis and the Ruchni stronger. That's the way you should look at it. It was actually a good thing. He made the connection. If there's no Beis Hamikdash, then the physical has to reflect that. So there used to be an abundance that fruits used to have these honey juices flowing out. And now it lost all of that extra unique juice. And therefore, relative to the way it was before, we consider that which is right now something that's rotten. Says the Gemara, he had a row of fig trees. And when he arrived a bit later, so much juice, so much dvash oozed out itself from his figs that you had a whole ocean, you had a whole sea of dvash surrounding them. So Baruch Hashem, people over here, I think, are looking at buying the whole neighborhood in Yehuda. Keep the fig trees far away from the houses. You're going to have flooding problems. That's the way you have to look at it. You have no idea what one tree will do when the Beis Hamikdash will be built. But take precautions. Or build a pump. Okay. Chad Barnash. Havazara Chakla Lefes. You had a person that sowed a field of turnips. What happened was, again, about Zman, not about size, but about Zman. You put a seed in, right away the turnip used to grow. That's called a business. Put a seed in the ground, you get a turnip. Put a seed in the ground, you get a turnip. I think there are some places in the world where the earth produces twice a year. I think in Brazil they have such places. The earth is so rich. The beauty of Eretz Yisrael, the earth is not rich. It's not a physics, but the Kedusha is so rich, and it's reflected on it channels through the earth so quick that when things are the way they should be, you put a seed in, it grows right away.
The eggs, they lay eggs twice a day.
They lay, now there's a reason for that. I got it. Okay. Now, Maisa B'Shul, there once happened that there was a fox, that he was able to make his den on top of one turnip. You understand that? To take a turnip and to burrow out on the turnip a place where you can have your children. So not only were they growing quick, but they were humongous. There was once in the city of Shichem, they had one single stalk of mustard that had on it 3 badin. Okay, so far that's normal, but you know how much grew from those branches? The nifshach echad mehem, one of the branches broke off. You know how large that one branch was? One branch from one stalk. It's a third of the stalk. That a potter's hut who needed to cover it used that one branch to cover his entire hut. And they were able to take a couple of gallons of mustard seed off the one branch that came of the one stalk of a mustard plant in Shichem. I once had a single stalk of mustard. When I would have to go up to take up the mustards, the stalk itself was so stark that it was mamish like going up a fig tree. In other words, it was thick, it was solid. If you can just imagine, Caden, if you can put a picture of what a mustard stalk looks right now and put it next to a fig tree, and then you'll appreciate even physically how things used to be. Now, guys, we don't have to go any further than opening up a chumash, right? Parsha Shalach. Point of the Gemara is that those brachas are connected to the kedusha of the Holy Land, and before Hashem gave the land to the Jewish people under the leadership of Yeshua, that there was a chesed chinam, the people that lived there were not worthy of but those brachas were found over there, compounded with many chazals that hold that the damage of the flood, maybe physically the waters of the flood, did not go into Israel, did not remove some real upper layer of rich soil in Israel. So there was a physical part of it, and then there was the emes, the ruchnius part of it, and that's what this Gemara is referring to. That the diminution, when there was a Beis Hamikdash, it was on one level, even by Yesheni, imagine by Yisrishay, and then the land was stubborn, but at some point, the land itself aligned itself to that which is happening, the ruchnius. In those days, a step down, many steps down, and this is all for us to understand where we're heading into. Says the Gemara, that he planted one saw of beans, and one saw produced 300 saw. So they told him that the blessings are starting to come. So he told them, go away, because the Yanchas Tala Bishale. No. That actually, because of you looking at what's happening in my field, you brought an ayin hara. That's what they say over here. That's what the Pnei Moshe says. Because the loikein b'chafla havid nevad. Really, it should have given me 600 saw. Because they saw, wow, 300 saw. Said this Jew, the opposite. This year was a bad year. Look inside the Pnei Moshe, certain lines from the top. That don't say anything. From when you looked at my field, what happened was that's why we say tal, right? Even though tal loy ma'atzra, the Gemara says in the beginning of Tainis, but the tal of bracha could be ma'atzra, the opposite of tal of bracha. If you wouldn't have looked at it with your ayin ra eyes, that have a ma'aser sh'amar Rabbi Yehuda l'vnoi b'sichnin. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbeinu HaKadosh, told the son in the city of Sichnin, go to the second story, bring from us some dried figs. Dried figs. You know what dried figs means? When he stuck his hand into the barrel of dried figs, even them, it was full with honey. Amaloin, Abba Sholdevashi, he thought it's mamish, only of honey of figs, but no figs. Amaloin, no, hashka yodecha, stick your hand in deeper. And you're going to find over there the dried up figs. Even dried fruits were filled with honey. This is a mashal of a yid, that even when a yid looks to be dried, we're filled with lachluchias. Says the Gemara, same thing, go to the second story and go bring us some dried figs. He saw that the entire second story was awash in honey. No, there's something special about figs in Eretz Yisrael, and beware, in a good way. Plant your fig trees far away. The whole second story was flooded. No, it's a great thing, but just not seeping through not making your ceiling sticky. Then, what do you think? You want honey in your bed, on your floor?
You have a good container with it, whatever.
In other words, that's what I was saying. That you think that you need to have a container of 10 gallons. When Mashiach will come, you need 100 gallons. Be careful. Rab Chananya Rab Chananya made his livelihood by selling bees honey. And I want you to know, guys, bees honey is more expensive. It's more expensive than all of these fruit honeys. And he also, he owned the vash that salyon. Salyon means something that oozed out of fruits, whether it's figs, whether it's other. But bottom line is that his main livelihood was selling bees honey. Some drivers came to buy his special bee honey, and Mila Yada Zabenle Dvash Tetzalyon. Mila Yada means lo Yada. Beshoige, by accident, the fruits that produced honey, that honey was so superior that it tasted like bees honey. So by mistake, he gave them really what should be called a inferior honey, which, by the way, he also sold, but for much less money. He sold them a inferior product, thinking that it's bees. They paid for the bees honey. And Basar Yermin, after a while went by, Abrun Tamon, these people passed by, and Amaloin, so Rab Chananya told them, begin, lo matoya l'choin, listen, I have to refund you. I made a mistake. I don't want to be the one tricking you. You should know. He's explaining. Why am I giving you a refund? I gave you honey. I didn't do it by on purpose, but I gave you the fruits honey, not the bees honey. They told him, what you gave us was so good, we came to buy more of that. In other words, they were also honest. They were saying, we're not going to take a refund. That's exactly what we want. Minei anon boy. Why? Because do tav live it in. Because for our business, it was actually even better. So what happened was, you had a real elevated dispute. That's an elevated in Torah. He wanted to give him a refund. They didn't want to take the refund. So you can't force them to take it, but Rabbi Hananya did not want to keep the money. So what did he do with the money? So that difference, right, of what he felt he should not have gotten, he separated, and with it, he built the Beis HaMedrash of Tzipoiri. In other words, I think what we're saying over here is that when people in their business, they have a elevated ethics. When they have elevated ethics, not only will they not lose money, but they will have, from their Meiser money, enough money to build the Eden project. And the Gemara says like this, that Rabbi Elazar ben Abshimon, he went to a certain place, and Aisun Kumei Keruv Mitzamak, they brought to him a cooked cabbage. Amaloin, it was so sweet. He tells them, Sagin Devash Yahavtun Bey. How much honey did you put in here? It was that sweet. So they told him, Loi Havinu Bey. We did not add not a drop of sweetener. Minei Ubehu. The sweetness is coming from the cabbage itself. So really what we learned today was that when the Kedusha is the way it should be, being that especially in the Holy Land, the physical and the spiritual are linked to the highest level, as it should be everywhere, but it begins over there. So the result will be that the size, even Makoim, will be humongous, that things will grow extremely quick. You put a seed in and it comes out, Zman, and then you have quality meaning the Tam. Tam is Tainu. Tam, the highest level, is also manifesting, and it will manifest in the sweetest of ways. Even that which is not sweet will have a tremendous amount of sweetness. At Kana Gadata, and now we're going to travel back to Masechtas Peah. Peah Kol Zayis. Guys, we're learning on Daf Samach Beis Amud Beis, right? Halacha Dalid, and we had a similar discussion that a person needed to irrigate his field, and you had Peah on it that the Aniyim didn't pick up, or Leket on it. Are you restricted? Are you not restricted? A very similar discussion over here. And here we're speaking about Hamedel Bigfanim. Hamedel Bigfanim means that whether you did it on purpose, whether or not you planted your vines so close one to the other that as they are starting to grow, you know that you have to thin them out. So thinning out means that in the short term you're losing vines, but you're making space. Make space for your fellow. Yeah.
It's like pruning.
It's what we have to do in our lives. Speak less, listen more, to make space for the other guy. Don't take up all the space. Correct. Pruning is that you're making it smaller to get bigger. Here, if you're not going to do it, all the growth will be stunted from all. No one can grow. None of the vines can grow. By pruning, they grew already. Here, it's going to grow better, stronger. The problem is that one of the matnas aniyim on Academy is oilless. Oilless is something which remains on the vines. Am I allowed to thin out the vines when I'm taking off something that belongs to the aniyim? From these vines, something will grow that's not mine. It's not mine to take off.
When you're cutting those, you're doing that thinning. Where's that? Those things that you're trimming, where are they going?
In the garbage.
You're saying they're not actually developed enough to be.
Yeah. In other words, there aren't oilless right now. But the question is, do we view all vines as 90% yours, 95 and 5% aniyim's?
So there's a potential oilless that's not there yet.
Correct.
That's what we're
amazing
saying?
Yes. Says the Mishnah, the right says Rabbi Yehuda, that just like you're not restricted on your own, maybe, Danny, maybe, I'm saying a maybe. They are already they have oilers on it. Now I know that when you cut them off with oilers, those will go to the aniyim. But since you see there's oilers, maybe so then you should leave it next year. It's also going to produce oilers. In other words, what I don't know is whether they already have oilers or not. The ones that are on it won't be problematic. You're cutting off the branch, but you're giving the oilers to the aniyim.
Can we back up? If there's underdeveloped cluster.
Well, let me just take that back for a second. What we learned in the previous Mishnah, that if you have on one branch many clusters, if you cut off the whole branch,
then you're okay.
Then you keep the oilers. Maybe that's the question. So if I'm doing it the kavana to be madel, but when I'm doing the madeling, I'm almost taking away his. I don't know what the focus is on. Danny, what were you saying?
I was saying that in general, with this concept of oilers, when you find an underdeveloped cluster, as you're harvesting you leave
it on.
You leave it on, or do you stem
you leave it on? No, you leave it on. You leave it on. You leave it on. You don't touch it. So here you're allowed to do a dividend Rabbi Yehuda. Rav Meir Oymen, no, b'shaloi hu rashoi. I think that's what it is. We're speaking about you already have oilers on the branches, and I think there's a presumption that these branches that are producing underdeveloped clusters, they will continuously produce underdeveloped clusters. You look at the Bechar, a klutz. You can presume the other kids. I don't know. I'm just kidding. It's like it's already producing for the aniyim. How can you touch them?
That one cluster will just grow as oilers, and you're cutting it off early, so there's going to be less grapes on it. No?
So I don't know if it's that or if it's for the future. That's what I'm saying. Okay, now the Gemara gives a Gabaldic clarification. It's going to take a second. First of all, says the Gemara that Hakol Moedim, Rabbi and Rabbi Yehuda agree that when you sell to your friend specific 10 clusters, I have a vineyard and I told you, and each one has a number, and I sold you those 10, I cannot touch them. I cannot say, I want to trim them because my other one should. There's no doubt that in the relationship of a Moichet and the Lekeach, once a transaction was made on specific branches, the owner may not touch. Everyone agrees in contrast that when you have a partner, this is such a Gabaldic way of looking at things, even though you never spoke about this question, but whatever I'm allowed to do for mine, I can do on my partners. So if me and you own a vineyard, and we're going on the presumption that my understanding that it has to be madled is correct, I can madle the whole thing. I don't need to get your permission, because in the long term, what I'm doing is good for my partner. In the long term. Right now, that's the agreement. Normal maintenance should be done for everyone's benefit, even though currently part of the maintenance means in the short term, I'm diminishing the amount of lines. Just the one line. What is the machlokes? Beautiful. Rabbi Yehuda, Avid like Yeshuta. Rabbi Yehuda treats the poor like a partner. If I can madle with a Gabaldik, so he's my partner. The ani is my partner. And Rav Meir looks at the ani like my purchaser. I'm like a moicher. This is Gabaldik. So that's the way it works, guys. When it comes to moicher lekeach, we look at short term. This, right now, a partnership is a long-term relationship. We have to make God our shutif. And not, I paid my dues, I gave God his tzedakah. No. Well, not that God, we're the ani in the relationship. I get it. But coming back over here, that's the matnas aniyim. The matnas aniyim is a shutif, I think, because our relationship with God is one of shutifs also.